The air over the Gulf of Finland on the night of September 13th, 2025 was cold, sharp, and heavy with the scent of salt and crude oil. At the Primorsk oil port, Russia's colossal energy gateway on the Baltic Sea, the scene was one of relentless mechanical industry. Under the sterile, sodium vapor glare of 1,000 industrial lights, two giants of the sea, the supertankers Kusto and Cai Yun, sat tethered to the southern pier like slumbering leviathans. It was exactly 1 a.m. local time, and they were in the final critical stage of their fueling. Deep within the port's metallic heart, immense pumps throbbed with a rhythmic, thunderous beat, forcing a torrent of black gold through pipelines as thick as ancient trees. Hundreds of thousands of liters of Urals crude, the very lifeblood of Moscow's war economy, surged into the cavernous holds of the ships. Each vessel, a marvel of engineering with a capacity exceeding 120,000 short tons, was a floating vault. A single fully laden tanker represented hundreds of millions of dollars, enough to sustain Russia's strategic export flow for days, ensuring that vital energy contracts with Europe and China were honored, and that the treasury funding the war in Ukraine did not run dry. To the Kremlin, these ships were instruments of economic power and geopolitical leverage. To the port workers going about their duties, they were just another night's work. But hundreds of kilometers to the south, in the embattled heart of Ukraine, they were seen for what they truly were: the exposed veins of a gasping war machine. To strike them was to strike at the very heart of Russia's ability to wage war. And in the shadowed corridors of Ukrainian military intelligence, a plan months in the making was about to be unleashed. Within hours, a treasure of black gold worth over $200 million would erupt into an unquenchable fireworks display, a signal to the world that no corner of the aggressor's territory was safe. At 1:15 a.m., from a covert, hastily assembled launch site deep within the forests of northern Ukraine, the silence was shattered. The first Luty-96, the fierce, unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV, screamed into the night. It wasn't the roar of a jet engine, but a high-pitched electric whine like a ghost tearing through the fabric of the dark. Mounted on its launch rail, it was a sleek, predatory shape, painted a matte black that absorbed the faint starlight. With a violent hiss of its rocket-assisted takeoff motor, it catapulted into the inky blackness and vanished. 10 seconds later, another followed, then another and another, a relentless, perfectly timed procession of technological vengeance. In the makeshift command bunker nearby, Major Katerina Astrovoloshina watched the telemetry on her screen, her face illuminated by the green glow. Each ascending icon represented a single programmed thought, a single purpose. For weeks, her team had planned this. Every route, every contingency, every feint was encoded into the silicon brains of these drones. Within a mere 7 minutes, the entire swarm of over 40 UAVs had left their rails. They were not a clumsy barrage, but a pack of trained suicide hounds, each carrying a warhead of nearly 65 pounds of PBX-12, a thermoplastic polymer explosive variant renowned for its superior penetration capabilities. All were directed at a single objective: Primorsk. But they would not fly a straight path. A direct approach was suicide against the layered air defenses of northwestern Russia. Instead, the moment they reached their initial waypoint, the swarm executed a complex pre-programmed maneuver. It split seamlessly into 3 distinct axes, a tactical pincer designed from the outset to deceive, disorient, and fracture the Russian air defense response. The center axis, the largest with 20 UAVs, immediately dropped altitude, hugging the rail corridor that snaked its way north via Belgorod and Voronezh. They flew at a breathtakingly low altitude, under 656 feet, a river of silent death flowing beneath the lobes of Russian ground-based radar. The east axis, a contingent of 10 UAVs, embarked on a long, looping detour. Their path took them via Tambov and Ryazan, deliberately skirting the heavily fortified regions around Tula, a high-priority no-fly zone protecting Moscow itself, bristling with the most advanced S-400 and Pantsir S-1 batteries. The west axis, another 10 UAVs, took the most daring route. They shadowed the Belarus border, using the terrain as their primary shield. Deep forests, river valleys, and rolling hills served to mask their approach from Russia's powerful long-range Podsilnuk and Nebo-M radars, whose electronic eyes were programmed to look for threats at higher altitudes.
Controlling this intricate aerial ballet was the Skynode S platform, a low-level artificial intelligence system that made the Luchi a true nightmare. It was a fusion of computer vision, high-resolution infrared cameras, and real-time digitized terrain maps. There was no need for a constant link to a human pilot. Even as Russian electronic warfare units began to blanket the region with GPS jamming signals, the drones remained unperturbed. Skynode automatically switched to a sophisticated inertial and localized navigation mode. Power lines, the skeletal geometry of transmission towers, the distinct contours of a forest, the silver thread of a drainage channel, all were mapped by the AI, cross-referenced with onboard data, and used as vital, unjammable navigation landmarks. No radio signals were emitted. No remote control chatter could be intercepted. The swarm was a ghost in the machine, effectively immune to Russia's formidable electronic warfare capabilities. For hours, they flew on, a silent promise of the dawn of fire that was to come. At 3:41 a.m., as the converging swarm closed on the Velikia Luchi region, roughly 140 miles from the Leningrad Oblast border, Ukraine played its trump card. From a darkened control center near Kharkiv, an operator entered a final command. High above the Earth, in low orbit, a Ukrainian reconnaissance satellite, previously thought to be a simple imaging platform, reoriented itself. This was no ordinary spy satellite. It had been modified in secret, equipped with a false reflection module, a sophisticated piece of electronic warfare hardware designed for a single, audacious purpose: to temporarily blind the critical early warning radar chain along the Smolensk-Novgorod line.
This was the electronic tripwire for northwest Russia, the belt of overlapping radar fields that allowed the military to detect threats coming from Belarus, Ukraine, or the Baltic states. As the module activated, it began to emit a powerful, complex stream of electromagnetic energy. On the ground, Russian radar screens at posts manning Podsilnuk, Gamma DE, and even the vaunted Nebo-M systems were suddenly flooded. Dozens of false returns bloomed on their displays, a phantom electronic cloud moving at speed towards the northwest. Alarms shrieked. In command centers across the region, operators scrambled to make sense of the sudden blizzard of red blips. Was it a massive NATO electronic attack? A precursor to a cruise missile strike? While the Russian command structure reeled in confusion, the 40 very real UAVs, flying low and silent, slipped quietly beneath the chaos, straight towards their true objective. The 7-minute window of electronic pandemonium was all they needed. By 4 a.m., after nearly 3 hours of grueling terrain-hugging flight, the entire formation had reached the approaches to the Gulf of Finland, less than 95 miles from Primorsk. The deception was not over. Now, the second phase began. 5 UAVs from the center axis unexpectedly peeled off from the main formation. Their flight profiles changed dramatically. They simultaneously swung their noses up, their electric motors screaming as they climbed rapidly, ascending to an altitude of 16,400 feet. They were no longer ghosts. They were turning themselves into bait. Each was fitted with a cluster of radar reflective panels and a signal emulation transmitter, devices designed to accurately simulate the radar signature of a much larger high-altitude strike package, perhaps cruise missiles or tactical bombers. In the eyes of Russian radar, these tiny drones were now a major conventional threat. At 4:08 a.m., on the primary screen at the Levoshevo Early Warning Station in the Novgorod region, 5 clear, stable, and unusually strong returns appeared. At the local Air Defense Command, the atmosphere, which had just been calming down from the earlier jamming event, became electric with tension. Unidentified targets, slow speed, low altitude initially, but with an unusually high radar cross-section, a young lieutenant reported, his voice tight. Likely reconnaissance UAVs or small aircraft. They are committable for engagement, Comrade Colonel. The order was issued without hesitation. 2 Panzer S-1 batteries in the Yarosov sector roared to life. 4 57E-6 missiles streaked into the sky on pillars of fire. Seconds later, from a concealed position near Cherepovets, an S-400 battery, the pride of Russia's air defense, fired 2 48N-6E missiles. Traveling at Mach 6, they covered the distance to the targets in a flash, their advanced seekers locking on to the prominent radar signatures. Just 40 seconds later, all 5 returns vanished from the screens. Thermal cameras recorded multiple hot fragments raining down into the forested area north of Novgorod. A confident announcement crackled over the command network. 5 high-altitude intruding targets neutralized. Sector is clear. No ongoing threat. The Russian officers allowed themselves a moment of relief. They had successfully defended their airspace. They had no way of knowing they had just expended millions of dollars in advanced missiles to shoot down 5 sacrificial, pre-programmed decoy drones. Below them, skimming the treetops and silent as the grave, the remaining 35 Luti UAVs pressed on. At 4:17 a.m., the central formation crossed the vast, dark expanse of Lake Ilmen, pushing into the corridor between Novgorod and Leningrad. The drones were now spaced precisely 650 to 980 feet apart, maintaining a terrifyingly low altitude of below 330 feet. On the Russian radar screens, everything remained utterly, deceptively silent. At 4:22 a.m., the western wing approached the southern edge of the Narva Gulf. In the Vyborg Air Defense Command Center, a junior officer leaned closer to his screen. A faint, intermittent blip had begun to appear. The data was fuzzy, unstable. "Sir, I have a possible contact. Low-speed, intermittent returns," he reported to his superior. The officer on duty glanced at it. "Could be a flock of migrating ducks or atmospheric clutter. The jamming earlier may have left artifacts. Keep watching it. Don't be the one who shoots at geese, Lieutenant." The engagement order was delayed. Nobody wanted to be the first to press the button on what might be a radar illusion, a ghost on the screen. That hesitation would prove fatal. Simultaneously, the 10 eastern UAVs crossed the Onega Lake area, approaching the Petrozavodsk-Vyborg rail line, a logistical artery leading straight to Primorsk. The Russian electronic warfare teams had established GPS dead zones along this critical route, but they were useless. The lead UAVs,
using their real-time terrain synchronization algorithms, constantly matched sensor data to their 3D maps. Their infrared cameras picked up the faint heat glint from radar towers ahead, and the SkyNode AI instantly adjusted their course, weaving around each watch point as if it had flown the line 100 times before.
At 4:27 a.m., with the first drones less than 25 miles from Primorsk, the illusion shattered. Russian ground radars suddenly began to register real hard contacts. Not one, but dozens. Numerous small targets hugging the surface, moving at moderate speed and converging from 3 different directions. At the Air Defense Command near Vyborg, the duty lieutenant colonel's face went pale. He slammed his fist on the console. Situation level 2. Activate all Panzer batteries. Expand monitoring sector to the southeast and the coastline. Now! But it was already too late. By the time the Panzer radars swept the designated sectors, the 3 UAV formations were no longer separate threats. They were a single, synchronized encirclement, timed to the second, closing in from all directions. Within 45 seconds, the Baltic air defense controllers confirmed the worst. The entire swarm was on a terminal attack vector for Primorsk. Panic gave way to frantic action. 6 Panzer S-1 batteries were ordered to fire at will. From the coastal woodlines, their launch tubes rose like angry serpents and spat a furious volley of 57 E-6 missiles. In the skies over Primorsk, the final, desperate battle began. The 35 remaining UAVs split into their final attack prongs, dropping below 200 feet, weaving between container yards, coastal rail lines, and petrochemical complexes. They were now operating fully on the principle of the swarm. Each UAV was an independent entity, yet also a node in a collective consciousness, constantly sharing flight data, adjusting its bank angles to match the leader, and evading incoming threats with SkyNode's synchronized algorithms. Russia's last defensive layer responded with brutal force. Operators on a Panzer S-1 battery screamed as their RS-121E radar finally achieved multiple hardlocks. In the next 90 seconds, the sky was filled with explosions and streaking tracers. 25 of the UAVs were destroyed, half shredded by the Panzer's 30mm autocannons as they closed to within 650 feet, the rest intercepted by missiles at point-blank range. But the final 10 UAVs were different. They were the alpha wolves of the pack. Each had been assigned an independent, high-value target, programmed with unique terminal flight algorithms, and carried the heaviest payloads, reserved for the killing blows. As their brethren were immolated around them, they simultaneously activated their terminal attack mode. Primorsk oil port had only minutes left to exist. At 4:44 a.m., the last 10 Lyuchi UAVs dropped below 165 feet, skimming the sea surface to hide within the radar clutter reflecting off the waves. Their SkyNode S navigation suites, now cut off from the rest of the destroyed swarm, autonomously redistributed their final attack routes based on the preloaded hierarchy of targets. They did not converge on a single point. They moved to decapitate and disembowel the port's entire operating chain. The first 2 dove straight at the port's squat concrete operations center, the brain that controlled all loading schedules, fueling processes, and satellite routing. Instead of a simple perpendicular run, one pulled a sharp, impossible climb from the left, then plunged nose first through a second-floor window that its image recognition had identified as housing the main server cluster. The blast was not large, but surgically precise, and it all but severed Primorsk's nervous system. As flames burst from the upper floor, 2 other UAVs simultaneously struck the supertanker Kusto at the southern pier.
The first slammed into the engine room at the stern, the PBX-12 warhead piercing the steel hull before detonating, wiping out the power station and halting the oil pumps mid-flow. The second came in low from the starboard side, ramming the main intake pipe where it connected to the ship. A colossal secondary explosion ripped through the deck. Unfinished crude, gushing from the severed pipe, spilled across the pier and ignited in less than 6 seconds into a raging river of fire. At 4:45 and 12 seconds, 2 more drones locked onto the tanker Chikalov. It was just beginning to connect its intake lines for the final transfer. The first UAV tore into the intake valve control room on the pier. The second screamed into the forward operations cabin on the ship's deck. A column of fire nearly 100 feet high roared from the deck, a death torch against the pre-dawn Baltic sky.
As chaos engulfed the piers, 3 more UAVs swung inland toward pumping station number 2, the massive hub that regulated more than 35% of Primorsk's total export throughput. The first destroyed the main pressure compression array. The second punched through the roof and detonated inside the flow control regulator room. The third tore into the input signal receiver that communicated with the main control center. The impacts were less than 0.8 seconds apart. Across the pipeline network, pressure surged beyond all safe limits. A moment later, a thunderous blast ripped the pumping station's roof clean off. Black smoke, scorching heat, and twisted steel fragments clawed into the sky. Primorsk had lost its heart. In just 2 minutes, the last 10 UAVs had surgically struck the port's vital organs. 2 supertankers were ablaze. The central pumping station was obliterated. All power and coordination systems were severed. Fires raged out of control. When the first firefighting crews arrived, they were met with a wall of heat. Temperatures at the pumping hub exceeded 1,830 degrees Fahrenheit, melting steel and rendering any approach impossible. With no other options, authorities were forced to seal off the entire port. Satellite imagery from later that morning showed Primorsk not as a port, but as a blazing scar more than a mile long, with 2 core infernos from the tankers and 4 secondary fires raging across the facility. All tankers in the Gulf of Finland were ordered to withdraw immediately, triggering cascading logistical delays across the entire Baltic. The international oil market, ever skittish, wavered on the news. On the morning of September 17th, Russia's Ministry of Defense officially admitted that Northwest air defenses had intercepted a long-range UAV attack, insisting that most targets were neutralized. They gave no details about the damage to the port, but it was too late. International OSINT channels had already geolocated the strikes through nighttime satellite imagery, thermal readings, and videos posted to Telegram. The attack marked a watershed moment. With a few dozen low-cost UAVs, Ukraine had pierced one of the densest air defense belts in the world. They had successfully fused AI, swarm logic, electronic warfare, and tactical deception into a seamless, unstoppable weapon. Russia had expended priceless surface-to-air missiles, deployed vast forces, and still failed to stop the final devastating blow. The failure at Primorsk was a message, written in fire and smoke against the northern sky. It declared that in this new era of warfare, distance was no longer a shield, and even the most heavily guarded strategic assets were vulnerable. If Primorsk could be hit, nowhere else was safe.